I think you all know why we're here. I think you know why Jacob and I are here. We have a big opportunity in 2024. That's for a lot of good reasons and a lot of crappy reasons, right? Normally we spend in these talks an enormous amount of time talking about why we have such a big opportunity in 2024. But I think we're all on the same page here. If I can treat you like friends and adults, just to give the 30-second due that I think the opportunity deserves. The Republican Party has crappy leadership. The Democratic Party has crappy leadership. Each party has left behind what used to be its agenda, right? If you joined the Republican Party because you felt some sense of fiscal conservatism and you thought that you were going to be represented by that party, you have been greatly disappointed. You and that party have gone in two profoundly different directions. When I was growing up, several hundred years ago, you used to find once in a while a Democratic politician who would represent an anti-war movement, right? You're laughing at me. Your parents must have told you about this phenomenon. Yeah, it's there's another source of disappointment, right? There's almost no such thing as an anti-war candidate in the Democratic Party, and now that they've thrown out Robert Kennedy Jr., there really is no candidate in the Democratic Party that represents an anti-war position. The other thing, now that we have dispensed with that, right, what I really want to talk to you about is the fact that this is not merely an opportunity for the Libertarian Party in 2024. This is an obligation. We have an obligation to get this right. The federal government of the United States, and I would argue most of the states, have governments that are going in the wrong direction. And going in the wrong direction hard, in a bad way, in a profound and fundamental way, I'm afraid, reaching a point potentially of no return. My biggest fear is not that the federal government of the United States will go bankrupt before the end of this century. We are absolutely on a track to achieve that. My greatest fear is that people like you all in this room won't give a damn when it happens, because we will all have reached decades earlier, which is to say around now, that the federal government no longer even has an opportunity to add any value to anybody's life. And I think that that's a disappointment, because I have for the federal government to provide a lot of value in our lives, but I think the federal government of the United States has been in the past, youngsters, ask your parents once again, has in the past been able to demonstrate, if to no one else, at least to the rest of the world, that democracy can work. Now I fear that what we're demonstrating is that democracy does have a hell of a hard time actually functioning in a way that lasts. The reason this is such an obligation for us, for people like you in the room who are running for local office, and remember, there is no higher calling than running as a libertarian for higher office. You go out there and you get your ass kicked for no other reason than to spread the message. There's no opportunity for remuneration, for self-aggrandizement. You do it for no other reason than to spread the message. If you're running in a race, never mind everybody else, just from you and I can just... If you're running in a race that's not partisan, you could accidentally win, right? And that would be a really cool thing. But for all of you in partisan races, it's really an uphill slog. And what you realize is most Americans can't even spell libertarianism, much less identify what the heck it is, right? So you're really out there spreading the message. Back to our obligation. This is such a big obligation. No one else out there is going to lead the charge to fight our way back toward the Constitution. By the way, I apologize when I said I was only going to 60 seconds or so. Never mind all that. I got pissed. Let's be curious a couple more minutes. If you're waiting for a Republican to stand up for your rights, fiscal conservatism, free markets, how about free trade? Not going to happen. Republican is not going to lead the charge back toward the Constitution or free markets. If you're waiting for a Democrat to lead the way back to the Constitution, is a Democrat going to stand up for your Second Amendment rights, Fourth Amendment rights as a cop? Does anybody know a Democrat who can spell 10th Amendment? Not going to happen. The people in this room, we are the philosophical descendants of the people that put this nation's government together, that wrote the Declaration of Independence, that assembled our Constitution, and did so only for one legitimate reason. We can all argue about why the government was put together, but there's only one legitimate reason why that government was put together, and that's to protect your individual liberties. Nobody goes across an ocean 300 years ago in order to do anything else but to raise their family according to their own standards. This is why we have such an... If you're a Mexico today and you're not thinking of running that board, phone is... And I'm afraid that we're losing that. It's up to us to fight for that. It's up to us to lead the charge back toward the Constitution. The election that we're talking about in this is not going to be about small things. It is not going to be about, should the retirement age be for Social Security? 68 and a half, 68 and 3/4. It's not what it's going to be about. It's going to be about values. And it's not going to be left-right values of the culture war. It's going to be your values versus the values of a political class that doesn't give a damn about your values. Even if they agree with your values, they still don't give a damn, because all they care about is making the decision for you, whether you agree with it or not. And maybe you do agree with it. That's not their interest. Their interest is command and control. Remember, your government operates in the shadows and does so because it does not operate in your interest. Lillian, cover your ears, sweetheart. It's going to get real in here for a moment. Look, it turns out to be true that the federal government that represents you, allegedly, took money from you and from your neighbors forcibly, mixed it together with money that it took from other people in other states, again, forcibly, sent it abroad to a shell corporation about which you know nothing, handed it over to someone who is not an American citizen for the single purpose of exploding a pipeline at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. This, unfortunately, turns out to be true, and I wish it weren't. Hold that thought. Put a pin in it just for a moment, because your government believes you should know nothing about that. It turns out to be also true that your federal government took money from you, again forcibly, and your neighbors, mixed it together with people from other states from whom it also took money, again forcibly. Mixed it together, sent it abroad to a shell corporation about which you know nothing, and handed it over to someone who's not an American citizen. I've just told you the same story. For the purpose of accelerating of a virus in a laboratory in China. Your government believes you don't need to know anything about this. It unfortunately turns out to be true, and we are all praying that we someday find out that the leak from that laboratory was an accident. Please, God, let it be an accident. Put a pin in that story, because your government believes that you should not know anything about that. It turns out to be also true that there's a young man who used to work for the Air Force who's being prosecuted by the federal government because he decided that he had no other choice but to risk going to jail because he felt like leaking information about what was going on in the Ukrainian war. Consider the information that was leaked. The information that was leaked talked about how poorly the war was going for the United States government. Let that sink in for a moment. How poorly the war was going for the United States government. That's a weird way to look at it. That we weren't getting a very good bang for our buck. That our investment was not going well. Now, as weird as that is, consider the following. The American government had this information. The Ukrainian government knows damn well how well that war is going. The Russian government certainly knows how well that war is going. From whom were we trying to keep this a secret? From us. From you, from us. Your government literally operates in the shadows and does so because it knows that you don't agree with its values. Explicitly understands this, even when we don't. Right? Consider, we know some of the secrets, we don't know others. Other secrets are being kept because the government realizes what it does is not in the interest of our values, only in their values. This is, I believe, what the next election cycle is going to be about. It's not going to be about small things. Back to Social Security. It won't be about the age of retirement, but it might be who has the guts to stand up and say, recruiting young people, from the looks of it, everybody in here, or am I just getting older? The idea of recruiting young people into a Social Security system and a forced retirement plan for the single purpose of propping up the pyramid scheme because we have such an overhang taking care of the retirees is evil. It's an ethical matter. It's not merely about financial planning, is it? About the ethics that underlie it. Your values are not being represented. This is why it's not only an obligation, but it is also an opportunity for us. More Americans than ever before realize that bad public policy is what's causing so many of our problems. More Americans than ever before are realizing that their values are not being represented by the two-party system. We have an opportunity because it is our values that align with most Americans. In this sense, the fact that it's an opportunity, the fact that it's an obligation, merge together. I believe to take advantage of this opportunity, we need to do a couple of things right that we haven't done very right in the past. We need to run a campaign that's very professional, very credible. I think that we need to run a campaign with a candidate who has some qualification. By the way, this is something that inside of our party, we don't spend much time talking about because we normally don't care. That I don't mean that to be in a pejorative sense. We just typically don't think that it's important that our candidates have a great deal of qualification behind them because we're so pissed off, right? That's okay with me. But outside of our party, there is a threshold that most Americans believe needs to be cleared in terms of qualification, or they don't pay any attention. The problem with that is that the reason there's an opportunity to spread our message in 2024 and to get some traction is because there is a race. Americans pay attention because they want to know who's going to be the next president of the United States. It's only because they're a competition. You have to literally be engaged in the competition to take advantage of the media attention. That's number one thing that we haven't done very well in the past. Number two thing that we haven't done very well in the past is we have to run a campaign on the very most principled issues and positions. As you all know, my platform is called the Gold New Deal. You can see it at goldnewdeal.org. And because one of my buddies recently shot his mouth off and told hundreds of people that you could find it at goldnewdeal.com, we had to go out and buy goldnewdeal.com. Which hadn't been available the previous year, which of course is why it's goldnewdeal.org, but for some reason it just became available. So you can go to those two websites and read all about it. It's very, very boring stuff to us, because to us it sounds like bread and butter, right? Most transformational ideas. We're talking about nullification, right? States' rights. Talking about police reform that I spent a lot of time talking about as a former cop. Talking about reforming how the federal government works. Fundamentally, what we're talking about is a new relationship between us and the federal government. The reason this is so important is not only because it aligns with Americans' values, but because it'll completely differentiate us from Republicans and Democrats. Remember, the object of the game is not to seek common ground with their politicians. The object of the game is to seek common ground with their voters and to cleave a hard edge against Republican politicians and to cleave a very hard edge against Democratic politicians. That's the object of the game. We are playing to win. I'll let you define what win is in your head. To me, winning is disrupting the duopolistic system that the Republican Democratic parties just take for granted that they'll always be in power. We must interrupt that. Exactly what that looks like on the other side, I'm not sure. But if we wind up with anything less than half of those people pissed off, we will have failed. We are not shooting here for 3 or 4 or 5% of the vote. We are playing to win. We are playing to disrupt to interrupt, to revolutionize the system, to force people to take our ideas seriously. To remind not only Americans who are not registered as Republicans, and those who are, that they have a libertarian streak. They wouldn't call it that. They can't even spell the word. But they do. And it's our job to remind them of that and to point out that their values better align with ours than with anybody else's. That's the object of the game. For those who say we can't play a major role in American politics, let me remind you of something that I think we all know, and maybe we don't say it loud too often. Come June, it's going to be down to a libertarian, probably Donald Trump, probably Joe Biden, maybe Robert Kennedy Jr., who thinks he's running as an independent. And believe in less important than that. Think about that for a minute. Think about what I just said there for a moment, because it's a mouthful. Re-electing a guy who already lost his re-election campaign, who's now under indictment 5 times. I'm not really impressed by the indictments. I recognize that he's being politically pursued. I get all that. Let me share what really bothers me about Donald Trump, in addition to all of his policies and the fact that he actually doesn't care about America. Never mind all that. If you show up at Thanksgiving dinner and you say, I've recently been indicted for mismanaging documents, I'm sure your brother-in-law says something like, well, that was stupid. You probably should have done that. Pass the potatoes. On the other hand, if you show up at Thanksgiving dinner and you say something like, I was recently found liable in a civil court for a sexual assault, I think that's a family conversation stopper. I think that that one actually bothers me. We're talking about someone whose values do not represent yours. I'm going to leave that hang as an understatement just for a moment so I can move on. If that guy is reelected, I'm going to say that's a weird thing. I thought it was a weird thing when he was elected first. We all understand it. That guy being reelected is a weird thing. Let's talk about Joe Biden. Youngsters, ask your parents. Guy who we did not consider very intelligent, very principled, or very ethical, and I'm going to count those as 3 different things, in his 40s. Okay? This is a guy who routinely was caught for plagiarism, who said really moronic things, and I mean, by the standards of my Labrador Retriever, dumb. And did so decade after decade after decade. If that guy, who is now obviously 5 years past his sell-by date, wins re-election, that's a weird thing. That's a weird thing. Robert Kennedy Jr., his number one qualification is he's an anti-vaxxer and he can't win the Democratic Party primary. Those are the 2 things that he's got going for him. Outside of that, he likes to position himself a little bit as a libertarian, but he's actually pro-state in every one of his positions. If that guy wins, that's a weird thing. So don't tell me that we're not playing to win, because for us not to win means one of those other weird things has to have happened. Yes, in the past it would have been weird for us to win. It'll still be weird if one of us wins going forward, but not nearly as it used to be. This is a crossroads for us. We are playing to win, and we're playing this game very differently than we have played it in the past. I think my 60 seconds are up. Y'all have any questions? We're going to open it up to not just weird questions. Is that the rule? I think Strat and I were talking about in the back. I think we're going to take weird questions and not weird questions. You don't seem very weird, ma'am, so.
I'm pretty weird.
Okay. Okay. I do like the double N in Jen.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Very extra.
Yeah.
So, similar to the question I asked Mike, what is your plan to get most amount of exposure for your buck? Because you're probably a numbers guy too. You know that you're.
Because you're mad at me, or?
I'm saying that because I'm a realist.
Yep.
Because if you're.
I mean, you called me a numbers guy. I thought that was kind of mean.
True to what you're saying, if
Yep.
you're taking a different strategy, and
Yep.
you're in it to win,
Yep.
not just to get on a platform. And
No. We're in it to break some China, right?
Okay, if you're in it to break some China, most literally. So then.
Yeah, I'm sorry. This is a poor choice of words.
Then
Mr. Anti-War is in it to break China. We're going to edit that out.
what's your real plan? What's your
Yeah.
What are you
I get
really
it.
going to do so people know you exist?
Yeah. There's a couple of fundamental things that we haven't done very well in the past that are going to contribute to that directly. The first is we're going to spend money right away, including money we don't have, by the way. And the reason you do that is because waiting until October has proved to be an unworkable solution. You need to make the announcement that there's a new sheriff in town right away, and that means spreading some money around. You need to run advertisement that you can't afford until later on in the cycle, but you need to do it in June. You actually, in my view, need to do it in March, but we can't, right? Because our party is a little bit messed up logistically. But having said that, you need to spend money right out of the box in branding yourself as being a completely different option, which is the second thing that we need to do differently, is that we need to run a message which is completely antithetical to, for example, 2016 Gary Johnson, I'm fiscally conservative like a Republican and socially liberal like a Democrat. If that's your message, I think that you ought to stay home. I think that's a waste of, in his case, like $10 million, a tremendous amount of money. I think it's a complete waste of money. The reason it's so difficult to run as a libertarian is because you have been failed by your national campaigns in the past. You've been failed by presidential campaigns that have not contributed to the branding of the party. The fact that nobody knows what libertarianism is, you can lay squarely at the feet of your past presidential campaigns, because that is their job, is to offer a choice that is starkly differentiated from the other parties, so there's no confusion, right? As a matter of fact, if there's an issue where there's overlap and there's agreement, I wouldn't talk about it at all. The good news is, most of the issues, there is no overlap or agreement, but that is the answer to the question. Hammer the issues that are completely differentiated. Right? Anti-war, stop Ukraine. Issues where you're not going to have much overlap at all with the other parties. And spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on that by Tuesday. Just right away. This fly really adores me. It's just trying to get close to Jen, but this is as close as he's got the guts to go. Yeah, it's a government drone. So there are tactical, strategic things that you can do in that regard. And remember that it's a completely new media world now. You know, it's podcasts. You know, I've done 100, literally 90-some podcasts in the last 18 months, something like that. You just need to keep at it, keep at it, keep at it. The media will pay attention to you if you have an interesting story. That's a combination of being a completely differentiated story, being an underdog, but also having the qualifications and the guts to spend money in a hurry. And there are no guarantees. George.
I'd like to ask a question about your 2 cents on the Libertarian Party's 3 various caucuses and how you sort of see kind of what I see as detrimental infighting. What are your 2 cents on that?
There is a lot of detrimental infighting. So I agree with that characterization wholeheartedly. Having said that, we had to have, right? Some of it we had to have. But I would guess that I'm not going to get a lot of argument when I say people on both sides of every one of these internal arguments have have in many cases played their cards wrong. There are a lot of people who suggest that the way this should be handled is for individuals not to be aligned with caucuses, that the caucuses hold us back, that they interrupt the flow of business, they preclude us from getting done what we actually want to get done. I actually take the exact opposite approach. I like the caucuses. I actually am a member of and participate robustly with the Radical Caucus, the Classical Liberal Mises Caucus. Those as me as a Mises Caucus person are not wrong. I've been in the Mises Caucus going on 3 years now. I've given my time, I've given my money, I've given my arguments and my disappointment, my advice. There are things that people have done that I think that they would do differently if given another opportunity. Let me speak real quick to why the Mises Caucus exists in the first place, because I think a lot of us inside and outside the Mises Caucus have forgotten why. The Mises Caucus gained a lot of momentum out of disappointment with past presidential campaigns. They felt that those campaigns were not sufficiently differentiated from the Democratic Party in particular, but also from the Republican Party. They were not sufficiently robustly principled. And I believe that the vast majority of the Libertarian Party agrees with that concept. The reasons that we have been mad at the Mises Caucus, and I think I'm allowed to say that, having given the amount of money I have to my caucus, the reason that we've been angry with the Mises Caucus from time to time is twofold. One, certain things were handled in a way that you would not handle, that you would not do if you had your eye on long-term success as opposed to short-term takeover. I realize this is like a 3-hour conversation, so let's, the other thing that we've all done wrong, and not just in the Mises Caucus, but I think that we've done wrong in the Libertarian Party. By the way, mistakes have been made by a lot of people outside of the Mises Caucus in the regard in which I'm about to address. And I think that we make a mistake in this regard outside of politics in our daily lives and outside of Libertarian Party within politics, and that is this. It is okay to be tolerant of what other people say. It is okay to have a differentiated point of view. It's okay even to have an edgy point of view. But there comes a time when it needs to be said that what Susie Q or Bobby Joe over here said, I don't agree with. And we have done a crappy job of communicating what is acceptable and what is not acceptable in everyday speech because we are so afraid of being anything but pro-1A in our party. So, for example, so this is more than you asked for, but as long as we pissed each other off. It is not okay to say war is gay. As a matter of fact, not only is it not okay to say that, it is something that would not be said by, or I think even found acceptable by, anyone I know. I literally don't think I know anyone who would say it's okay to say that. If it's okay with you that people say this sort of thing, I don't know you. And I think that we don't do a very good job of saying that sometimes. It's okay with me that a political party, does not take a stance on anything outside of the First Amendment as far as speech goes, right? In that sense, you will all recall that our party wrote out of its platform. This really is more than you asked for. We all wrote out of our platform a statement that said bigotry sucks, right? I don't remember the exact language. I get that, right? Because a political party is engaged in public policy, and public policy as a Libertarian Party, we don't want to have cover things like thought policing. Okay, I get the logic. That makes sense. But that does not absolve you of the responsibility of saying, when it comes up, things like, and by the way, I'm picking out the mildest of the three examples on my head because I know that we have a family audience here. When people say things like war is gay, we are nonetheless obligated to say, that's not okay. Being a libertarian does not absolve you of pointing out that is not an acceptable thing to say. And when I say that, I don't mean just in a political context. That's true. It's not okay in a political context because it makes you lose elections. That doesn't help us. It's not okay to say as a person. And being a libertarian does not give you a free pass. And I think that that's one of the things that pisses us off with each other, is that we're all afraid to say things like that. So I apologize if that. I think that that's the truth of the matter. All right, one more weird question? Or was that weird enough?
I'll throw a weird one just for Matt. To see that one.
Okay.
If your president in North Carolina seceded, would you send troops to undo us?
No. You will not secede if I'm president because I would have already sent troops to protect your liberty. I believe that the one thing that the federal government needs to be more muscular about is protecting our rights. So often, having spent 20 of the last 22 years in Florida, I've seen this weird fight between President Trump and Governor DeSantis. You can't violate the Constitution. It's my job to violate the Constitution, which I find really funny, right? I think the federal government needs to get more muscular in telling governors to go pound sand once in a while when governors try to violate the federal Constitution out of edgy position with regard to the culture war. That's what I would say about that. So, don't secede yet. Give me a chance, okay? Let me send in the troops first to protect your liberties. If that doesn't work, then, well, give me one more chance. The flagship of the Gold New Deal is an end to federal supremacy. The idea that you would be able to settle differences between state law and federal law in state court, okay? Now, maybe I'm keeping you in the union. Sounds better, right? Before you go to box number 3, give you 2 chances to stay with us. Which is a bad idea, right? I'm just trying to give you better options before you go all that far. The third thing to think about with regard to secession, I'm not convinced it would work. I mean, who are you going to secede from? All of a sudden, you're going to find out you got whack jobs who live in your own state. Now what? You're going to go down to a county versus county level? Then you find out the guy living next door is an idiot. Oh, now I got to secede from him. You know, I mean, it gets tough at some point, right? Anyone who's made the trip from Chicago to Springfield as many times as I have, I get it. It's 2 different worlds, right? Taking Illinois out of the pile wouldn't help me. And then I find out my mother's a communist. I mean, you know, I need the line to go like or through the kitchen. It's not easy. So give us a chance to resolve in state court an end to federal supremacy before you pull the gun, if you know what I mean. Was that for you?
Hey, he was the one asking the question.
He was the one asking the question, but
I want everyone to secede from the federal government.
yeah.
Hey, look, I'm down with seceding from my neighbor, so I don't know about you.
My huge argument against it didn't sound so bad. Okay, well, I get it. At some point, my argument is just exhausted. You're probably right. All right, you win this one. All right, thank you, guys. Thanks, I appreciate your time. Thank you.